Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Today we will talk about a very important topic that probably many of you have already started wondering about, and that is finding housing. And my name is Matthias, and together with our webinar guests today we will focus on giving you an overview of how to find housing when you come to Gothenburg to study. And we will start this webinar with a presentation, and then during the second half of the webinar there will be a panel with our international student ambassadors and also a Q&A session during which you can ask your questions. And with us today we also have staff from the university, a representative from the Swedish Union of Tenants, and we will be addressing your questions today via the Q&A chat. You can actually already start submitting questions during our presentation, but maybe please have in mind that some of the information that we will present might already answer your question. So we kindly request that you to wait with questions until the end of our presentation. And also all questions will be taken in written form through the Q&A chat. So you don't need to digitally raise your hand or ask for permission to speak. So let's get started. As I said, today will help you get a better picture of what the housing situation and the housing market in Gothenburg looks like, and introduce you to some of the most common ways of living in the city in terms of accommodation for you as students. We will show you where you can look for housing, address common questions, and also provide you with some information from the Swedish Union of Tenants on how to navigate the Swedish housing market as a newcomer to Sweden. And then our student ambassadors will share their experiences with you and talk a little about their housing situation and housing journey. And as I said, afterwards we will have our Q&A session where you can ask questions. And our goal with today's presentation and webinar is to hopefully ease a little bit of the anxiety or perhaps confusion that you might have around the topic of moving to Gothenburg and finding housing, but also to paint a realistic picture of what you can actually expect when planning to move here. So let's start with talking a bit about the housing situation in Gothenburg in general. So Gothenburg is the second largest city in Sweden, and as such it's a popular city to live in. It's also particularly a popular city among a lot of students. So as an attractive city for people to study and work in, many people are moving to Gothenburg, and therefore, as in many other big cities, there is unfortunately a general housing shortage. So therefore, finding housing in Gothenburg might be a little difficult, but it's definitely possible. And that's why we also encourage everyone to start and set up their search for accommodation basically as soon as possible. First of all, we would like to emphasize that the University of Gothenburg does not guarantee housing for admitted international students. And although there is student housing available in the city, it can perhaps be difficult to find a student room to move into just in time for the start of your first semester. But there are also alternatives to student housing, such as renting a room in an apartment or home, for example, as in renting a home in the house or apartment of a Swedish family. And it's also possible to rent private accommodation through a subletting contract or other short-term solutions, such as long-stay hotels or hostels. But we'll talk a bit about that. And something we also encourage everyone is to improve your chances of finding accommodation quicker. It's also very useful to not just look for a place to stay close to the center of Gothenburg, as that's a very popular area to live in. It's also a good idea to look into finding housing in areas outside of the city center as well, or even further in other cities that are close to Gothenburg. The public transportation system in Gothenburg overall is quite effective and well developed, so it's not really a problem to stay outside the city center, as commuting times can be shorter than you might expect. And as mentioned before, it's very important to know that the University of Gothenburg does not offer a housing guarantee for admitted international students. However, our academic housing services are able to provide a limited number of student rooms and apartments to two categories of students, and those are exchange students and tuition fee paying students. And as many of you are, in fact, tuition fee paying students, this information is quite relevant for you. Academic housing will contact those of you who have paid their tuition fees by mid-May with more information regarding the availability for this kind of housing that is administered by the university. Please note that the number of rooms and apartments, which almost all are for single occupancy, is quite limited, and if you are a fee-paying student, there is no guarantee that you will be able to receive housing this way. The demand is especially high before the autumn semester, and the university apartments are also reserved for incoming exchange students. So, as I said, there is limited availability, and you will receive information about this in mid-May if you are a fee-paying student. But regardless, you should definitely also consider other ways of finding housing, as we will continue to outline now. So we're going to talk about a few other options of finding a place to stay during your studies, regardless of whether you are a fee-paying student or not. We will just take a brief look at what kind of accommodation you could possibly find in Gothenburg, so that you understand what kind of options are out there and what kind of terms are used while renting in Gothenburg and Sweden in general that might be relevant for you, and so that you can start your search for accommodation as soon as possible and get familiar with finding housing in Gothenburg. One of the potential ways to find housing in Gothenburg is through student accommodation, in this case not administered by the university, which is very common for students at the University of Gothenburg, and there is a variety of different accommodation types that can be rented. There are different forms of student housing apartments, for example, from rooms with all shared amenities, bathroom, common kitchen, shared laundry, etc., to studios and also private apartments. One of the largest operators of student housing in Gothenburg is SGS, and all students, national and international, fee-paying or non-fee-paying, can apply for housing through SGS, of which you can see the website here on the screen. The distribution of rooms and apartments through SGS is based on a queue system, and you basically accumulate queue points from the day you register an account with SGS. And you can register as soon as you know that you want to study and live in Gothenburg, so that you can maximize your time in the queue. So that means that if you haven't done so already, you should definitely sign up now. And the waiting time for rooms and apartments on SGS varies quite a lot. Can be on average that you have to be in a queue for around 1.5 years, but it's also possible to be offered accommodation through SGS faster than that, as the waiting time for rooms and apartments differs greatly based on the kind of accommodation. So it can definitely pay off to keep a close eye on SGS and to check in frequently for last-minute offers and availabilities. So, if we're being realistic, it can be difficult to find a room through SGS for your first semester if you only join the waiting list now, but you might be able to get housing through SGS later in your studies. And then there's also another housing agency for students, and that is Chalmers Student Housing, which is also based on a queue system, and you as students from the University of Gothenburg can also register an account there as well. And there may be also other providers of, for example, queue-based student housing in Gothenburg, so this is not an entirely extensive overview. And aside from student housing, of course, then there's also the, so to say, regular housing market in Gothenburg that you can navigate for your search for accommodation in form of different types of apartments that are rented out by individuals or private or communal housing companies. And in general, there are two types of renting with this type of accommodation in Sweden. The first one being a first-hand contract, where you rent directly from a landlord, which could be a housing agency, a company, or a building owner. And that means that you basically rent your very own apartment. At the moment, it's very unlikely that you will be able to rent an apartment this way, as these contracts and apartment types are very popular and in high demand, and oftentimes there are queue systems in place, with many people queuing in housing queues for quite a long time. But it's good to know about these kind of terms and ways of renting in Sweden, especially if you also plan to stay in Sweden long term. And another type of renting, probably a little more relevant for you, is a second-hand contract. This means that you basically sublet accommodation from someone who themselves rents or owns an apartment, and these kind of contracts are normally for a limited period of time, and through these it's possible to, for example, rent entire apartments or a room in someone's apartment or family home. So how should you start basically when you want to navigate the housing market in Gothenburg? Our friends at movetogothenburg.com have gathered lots of useful information about where to start your housing journey, and also what kind of platforms you should take a look at, as there are quite a few. There are also digital marketplaces such as Blocket and Facebook Marketplace, which are very popular for finding housing, and we want to say that it is possible to find places to stay through these platforms, but you should always be careful as they are less safe to navigate, and from time to time it happens that there are scammers out there trying to make money of advertising apartments that actually don't exist. But you'll also hear a little more from the Swedish Union of Tenants and our student ambassadors about how to avoid being scammed and how to potentially detect scams. So if you head to movetogothenburg.com, you will find an extensive overview of different platforms so that to get familiar with for your housing search. And if you haven't found a place to stay at the beginning of the semester, there are also quite a few hostels and hotels that offer long-term stays in Gothenburg, and you can find a list of these also on movetogothenburg.com. And we will of course send you all relevant links after this webinar as well, along with a recording of this session. We also have some recommendations for those of you who are planning to move to Sweden with family. And we would like to highlight that although Sweden is a family-friendly country, it is perhaps hard to find student housing or other types of accommodation that is suitable for families right for the start of your first semester. And this could potentially be quite stressful. So there are two things that we recommend. One is that, of course, you should start looking for housing as soon as possible, which also applies to everyone, of course. Then we would like to recommend you to consider traveling to Gothenburg alone at first and find a place to live for yourself first. And then once you're here, it's actually a lot easier to look for housing, and then you can try to find a place to live that will accommodate your family. So there are a couple of things that are very useful to know if you are a newcomer in Sweden and are on the hunt for a room or an apartment. And we're happy to have a guest from the Swedish Union of Tenants to tell you a little bit more about some important key knowledge that you should know about ahead of moving to Sweden, such as avoiding scams, subletting, deposits, home insurance, and some tenancy rights. So I'll pass over to her so she can tell you all about it.
Hey, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Freya, and I work as a legal advisor and a legal assistant at the Swedish Union of Tenants, which is also known as Hyresgästföreningen. And yeah, welcome to our presentation. I'm just going to give you a quick lecture with some key knowledge that you should have as a brand new tenant in Sweden, basically. Okay, let's see if we can go to the second slide. Thanks. And just let's jump into the most asked questions. How do I avoid getting scammed by a landlord? Now, this might not be the easiest question because there are no straight answers, but based on our experiences at the Swedish Union of Tenants, I'm just going to present you some circumstances that usually indicate that the landlord might not be serious. And in general, of course, you don't have to worry too much, but if anything feels wrong or out of the ordinary, you might want to consider not signing the contract. So here are some indications to be aware of to avoid getting scammed, basically. One is if the landlord wants you to pay in cash, whether it is the deposit or the rent, I would just say, like, when it comes to renting, cash is not king. So remember that it's not good to pay in methods that aren't traceable, such as, so I recommend that you pay in like with bank transactions and other online methods instead of cash. And then another possible red flag is that if the landlord wants you to pay an unreasonably high deposit, this could be a sign that the landlord themselves are in debt, actually, and you might not get your deposit back. So then you might ask, what is an unreasonably high deposit? Well, I would say, like, if they demand a deposit that is equivalent to a month's rent, that's fine. But if it's several months' rent, then maybe like it could be considered a warning sign. And then also, if you haven't seen the apartment in real time and the landlord wants you to pay the deposit before you get the keys, you should be cautious because I mean, if you can, it's better to just come to an agreement with the landlord that you will pay the deposit and the first month's rent, like after you've signed the contract and you got the keys. Okay, let's continue. So some other indications, like if the rent itself is absurdly high, then that should be considered a warning as well. And if you do find yourself in this situation, if you're a member with us at the Swedish Union of Tenants, we can help you get back like excess rent that you shouldn't have paid in the first place. All right. And then also, let's see here. And there are many other ways, like that the landlord is trying to be sneaky. So be aware and do occasionally raise an eyebrow if something seems off. So, for instance, if the landlord sends you invoices that are addressed to themselves, but they ask you to pay for it, this could be a bit shady. And then also, like, if the landlord asks you, as it says, to not register yourself on the apartment, that is also weird because you have to, when you move, you have to like write yourself in the system that you live there. And then, of course, we have, if your landlord wants you to sign a contract and pay a deposit outside of CASA, and CASA is like a place where you can find contracts. Okay, if we can move on. Great. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about unauthorized subletting. And if you sign a sublease agreement and the landlord doesn't have the right to sublet their apartment, and this could mean like that they haven't been approved by their landlord in turn, this could be a bit risky. And while you still have the right to a fully functional apartment, of course, if your landlord's own rental agreement gets terminated during the rental period because of unauthorized subletting, then you don't have the right to stay either. So how do you then avoid putting yourself in this situation? And here are some tips for you. And like, just to have some kind of indication that it isn't allowed, that the subletting is unauthorized. If the rental agreement says that you are an inneboende, but your landlord actually lives somewhere else, this could be seen as a warning sign, because there is a difference. When you rent as an inneboende, you don't need to have an authorization from the landlord, but when it comes to subletting, then you do. So that's why it's different. And also, if you found your apartment on Airbnb and it's not owned by the landlord, this could also be considered, this could also be like a warning flag. And of course, if your rent is too high when it comes to the standard, and this could mean like if it's a very old apartment and things are not working, but you still pay a lot, that might indicate that it's not an authorized subletting. And we finally have the part with when it comes to paying the deposit in cash. Like, as I said, that is not recommended and could also be a sign that the subletting is unauthorized. And moving on to deposits. Yeah, as mentioned, like, don't pay in cash. Basically, if your landlord wants you to pay the deposit or the rent in cash, that should be a warning sign. But then if you pay your deposit, regardless like how the transaction is made, like what happens if your landlord doesn't want to give it back? How can you navigate yourself in this situation? And in this case, you would have to take your landlord to court. And we have the so-called rent tribunal, which is like, in Swedish, it's called Hyresnämnden, which is like a court specifically for rental cases. And then the court will decide if you have the right to get your deposit back or not. And that primarily depends on if there are any damages or unpaid rents. And keep in mind that you can only get your deposit back after you have moved out. So to get your deposit back, just make sure to pay your rent from the first one to the last one. Don't pay it in cash. Don't pay your deposit in cash. And make sure that you just clean the apartment thoroughly before moving out. And of course, common sense, like try to not cause any serious damages, or if something happens, make sure that you let your landlord know immediately so that it can be fixed. And also, it's really good to just keep your rental agreement, like take a picture of it if you don't have it online, just so you can use it if you have to. And also save a screenshot of the bank transfer of your deposit or any other evidence of the payment, which could be really good to have if you find yourself in a situation where there is a problem with the landlord. And of course, I have to mention something about home insurance, because like my final piece of advice is, please, I suggest you do get a home insurance. And in the picture, on the PowerPoint presentation, you can see some suggestions of insurance companies. Because if you cause any serious damages to the apartment, and sometimes it's not your own fault, like accidents do happen, you could end up heavily in debt unless you have home insurance. And this is regardless if you're renting a room as an inneboende, or if you have a sublease agreement, or if you have a first-hand contract. So you must always have home insurance. Yeah. So I am nearing the end of my presentation, and I will also check if there are any questions in the comments later. But I just want to finish by advocating for the Swedish Union of Tenants. And well, if you haven't heard about us earlier, you have now, which is great. And we can basically help you with any types of questions that are related to renting and rental issues. And for instance, like if you want help with getting your deposit back, or maybe disputing an invoice that you think is unfair, or just understanding your rights in general as a tenant, we can help you with that. And then we also have a new thing since the beginning of this week. We've launched our youth membership, which is cheaper than the regular one. So for like 39 Swedish crowns, like you pay a monthly subscription or a monthly fee, you can get help with these kind of questions. And I just want to also say that if you have a Swedish social security number, you can sign up on our website. But if you don't have that, you can contact us on the phone and just give your coordination number to become a member instead. Okay, that was all from me. I hope you found the presentation helpful, and yeah, thank you so much for listening.
All right, thank you for sharing some information from the Swedish Union of Tenants. We know that perhaps for many of you this is a lot of information to take in, and in case this is a little overwhelming, we can definitely understand that. But as I said before, you will receive an overview of what we're talking about today after this webinar, together with a recording of today's session, so you can bookmark it for future use and also always come back to it later on. But now we also want to hear from our current international students who are with us today and who have been through the process of moving to Gothenburg and finding a place to live. So yeah, here they are to tell you a little bit more about their experiences. And perhaps we can start with a brief introduction round.
Hi everyone, so I am Zarin. I'm currently in my second year and studying Masters in Management at the University of Gothenburg.
Hi everybody, my name is Jagoda and I am studying gender studies and my master, and I'm in my first year.
And I'm Abby. I'm in my second year of International Administration and Global Governance.
All right. Nice. Would you like to start, Zarin? Like maybe you can just tell us a bit more about your housing experience coming to Gothenburg.
Yeah. So my housing journey actually started a bit stressful, like most of the students, but it worked out in the end. When I got my offer University of Gothenburg around March, I immediately applied to the SGSQ because that's what most people recommend, and I assume most of the students are doing that as well. I thought if I did it early, I'd be fine, but after waiting for about like 2 months, I did not get any offer from SGS at all. That's when I started getting a bit stressed. So I began looking at other options like Casa, Boplast, and Facebook groups. But honestly, nothing really worked out either. Then I attended a webinar just like this one back in 2024. And that's where I heard about SBS, the student bosta there. The good thing is they don't require a queue. So I applied and actually got an offer pretty quickly. But I rejected it. I was still very adamant and focused on SGS and thought if I just waited a bit longer, something would come. And yeah, that did not happen. So by June, I still had nothing, and my move to Sweden was getting really close. So I applied to SBS again, and luckily I got accepted again. The only catch was that the contract started in July while I was arriving in Sweden in August. So I had to pay 1 extra month of rent, but at that point, I just did not want to take the risk of not having a place, so I took it. So right now, I still am with SBS. I currently live in Berilgatan in Västra Frölunda. It's about 15 to 20 minutes to the city center, so going around is really easy. And the area itself is actually really nice. It's quite calm. There's a park nearby, and one of the biggest malls named Frölunda Torg is very close. So you can find pretty much everything there. So even though it's not in the city center, I actually really like it. And if I had to give a few quick tips from my experience, first of all, please don't rely on SGS solely. I think that was my biggest mistake. And apply to multiple places at the same time and don't be too selective in the beginning. It's better to secure something first and then you can always move later. And also try to be flexible with move-in dates. Sometimes you might have to pay a bit extra, like me, but it can save you a lot of stress at the end. And yeah, just have a backup plan. I had friends who did not find housing before arriving, so they stayed in Airbnb for a while. I know it's not ideal, it's a bit costly, but it works temporarily, and it's always better to have a backup option if you cannot find anything else. And yeah, overall, finding housing is not impossible in my opinion, but it does take patience, persistence, and a bit of flexibility from your end. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for sharing some of your experiences. And perhaps we can just move on to Jagoda. What has moving and finding a place to live in Gothenburg been like for you?
Yeah, so I got pretty lucky with my housing experience, but it still took some time. So when I got accepted in March, I think I started looking for apartments, and I actually didn't look for apartment as SGS because I've lived in many places and I found my apartments through like Facebook and different apps. So I thought, okay, I'm just gonna try to do it on my own. And I saw people recommending Casa, so I started sending out offers in messaging people on Casa, and actually a lot of people did not reply or just didn't accept me. So that's one thing that I wanted to tell you guys, that don't get discouraged if you don't get your first offer or second person you contact, because a lot of people just post it and they sometimes don't look at it again, or they already have people that are gonna stay in those apartments. So just don't get discouraged. I actually got pretty lucky, and I got an offer in it was in June through a landlady that was renting out a room, and I moved in August because of the fact that it was through Casa, and also it was through landlady. It was quite flexible for me when it came to like dates, moving dates. But yeah, it was I got quite lucky. And I also wanted to talk a bit about tips on how not to get scammed, especially as finding if you guys want to find housing through Facebook, for example, or Casa. I've seen a lot of scammers, unfortunately, a lot of them on Facebook. There are a lot of groups, for example, that you can search. They're called Collective in Gothenburg, that collectives and just groups of people put on offers that they looking for somebody in the to rent out a room. And I have a lot of friends who actually did it, and they now live in collectives, which is super cool. But there is a lot of people who also try to scam, unfortunately, students. So I just wanted to say a few tips about what can you do to try to avoid them. So the first thing that is the most important is to check the person profile very carefully. If the account is new or has very few posts and it all looks suspicious, that might be a red flag. The second thing that I actually also did was I asked my landlady to have a video call with me to show the apartment. So I knew that the place is real, she's real, and it actually turned out very good. The third thing is never send money before you sign a proper agreement, because without it, it might be difficult to get it back. And finally, try to just be cautious if the deals seem too good to be true, or if they pressure or the landlord is pressuring you to act very quickly because there's a lot of candidates. You have to make up your decision now. Usually, those are the ones that will unfortunately be scammers. So yeah, that's my experience and a little bit of tips.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your housing experience and also your advice on how to like navigate some of these platforms. We've also got Abby with us, who can also tell us a bit more about her experiences moving to Gothenburg.
Yes. So similar to what was just said, I had a really easy process actually with my experience. I was able to receive a room offer from the separate queue that was mentioned earlier that people be emailed about for fee-paying international students. So I received that email around May, and then I got an offer in June and was able to move in August. I will just say though, I know other people who didn't get offers from that. Like it's limited, so don't like has already been said a few times. Don't count on just one thing. That like it's a one and done. Make backup plans. And I have a room in a flatshire. It's really nice. I also think that this was a nice option if you are eligible for this, just because it can be really stressful when you're so far away. So I was living in Australia while I was applying for housing, so of course I can't like take a tour or something of a place or come visit the city for a weekend. And it was really great to just have that sort of automatic credibility about it. And the area is up in Johanneberg. So this is a photo of it. And it's a really nice area for anybody wondering about places to live in the city. It's, probably one of the neighborhoods that more students live in for sure. But I also wanted to mention that I know not everybody that I know has had such easy experiences, and give some ideas of things that they've been able to do as like short-term options, and also just good, if you're worried and you want to have backup plans, just to know that what happens if you can't find somewhere that's got like the perfect place for the perfect move-in date and everything. So one option is looking for a single semester sublet. So of course, there are incoming, exchange and Erasmus students to Gothenburg, but there are also a lot of regular Gothenburg students who will be going away for a semester, and a number of them will, want to just move back into the same place that they were previously. So you can look for those single semester contracts and use that to accumulate more Q points, or at least then you're in the city, so you might be a little bit less worried about being scammed if you can go and do a tour in person. There are also short-term options that, you could stay at an Airbnb or with a friend or family for a really, short amount of time, and just keep a close eye on other options. I know probably like a dozen people who have done this, and then after the first month, so around October, they've been able to find an apartment that becomes available from SGS Express, which is just on the left side below the regular housing posts. And then Gothenburg is also really well connected on public transit. I don't think, most of the people that I know live in the city center. I don't actually think I know anybody who really does live in the city center. More people who are a bit on the outskirts or in other neighboring areas. And that can definitely be like another layer, I think, that feels a bit daunting if you're coming from far away, especially. But really, I would say use Google to make sure that you're in an area that's safe. Look up, the campus that you're on, and see how long the public transit time is. Last year, the student ambassadors, we did takeovers in different areas of the cities, and I made a template where you can actually go and look if one of those neighborhoods is that we talked about is one that you're interested in. And I made a template that shows the walking and transit distance between each campus from those different neighborhoods. So that's something that's on our Instagram, student.gu, if anybody is interested in looking for that. And then also just using the Västtrafik app will help you figure out the connections to campus. And then I'd also say that I know some people who have, if they've really had a hard time with everything else, they've gone onto Facebook and they've found something like, Canadians in Gothenburg, and they've been able to find someone who's from the same country as them. A lot of the times it's older empty nester couples who their kids have moved out and they've got a spare room, and they'll let someone stay with them for a week or two, and pay, utilities or something. So just, if you're really worried, I'd say just keep all of those resources in mind. And of course, do your own due diligence to make sure that what you're getting into is credible. But those are some things I know people have done. And yeah, that's all for me.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your experiences and tips as well. Lots of really good points that our ambassadors have raised. And of course, lots of things to take in for you as students who perhaps only got admitted around half a month ago. But we know it's a lot, but just, that's why we're doing these kind of webinars, for you to just take in the information. And also afterwards, as I said, we'll send you useful links, a recording, and so on, so you can think about it in your own time as well. So thanks to our ambassadors for sharing their input and their experiences. Just before we get to the final part and end of our webinar and the Q&A, we just want to highlight a few things as our key takeaways and advice from today's webinar. And one would be, of course, start your search as early as possible. And I also understand that maybe, now it's April, it's still quite a lot of months to go. It might seem difficult to look actively for housing now, to secure apartment, to move in July, August, September. But it's also just really important to just familiarize yourself with the different platforms. For example, go to movetogothenburg.com, check all the platforms you can find there, create accounts, just take a look, what do offers look like, what kind of apartments, places, rooms are out there, so that you can start step by step familiarizing yourself with how you could possibly find an apartment. Then we just want to mention again, the university does not guarantee housing, and as mentioned before, there's limited opportunities for fee-paying students to find housing through university-administered student rooms, most of them single occupancy, and fee-paying students will receive more information about this option in May. And then you can see how you could proceed with applying for that kind of housing. But then we also recommend to everyone register with SGS as soon as possible. even if that's not the place where you will find housing for your first semester, it's always useful and it can always come in handy later on. And for example, if as it's difficult to find a place through SGS in the beginning, we also encourage you to look at other options and also to consider renting outside of the city, just as Abby mentioned. It's very unlikely anyways to live in the actual city center of Gothenburg. It's a very popular place to live, very expensive, and also it's not actually necessary in order to commute to campus or your study facilities. You can take a look on our website or on your faculty or departments pages on our website where the study locations are, and then on Google Maps, for example, check the commuting distances from different areas of the city, of suburbs, or cities outside of Gothenburg, and you will see that it's actually not necessarily always that far. And we also just want to encourage you to be open for short-term solutions in the beginning in case your housing search doesn't work out exactly as you planned, that it's definitely possible to rent some short-term accommodation in the beginning, and then once you're in Gothenburg, it is a lot easier to find a place because you're there, you maybe know people, you've made some friends who know someone, and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, beware of scammers. We've mentioned it a lot, and we don't want you to be like overly scared and think, oh no, I'm going to be scammed. But we just want to mention it just because it's about safety and just knowing what you're looking at when you look at an apartment, room, or housing ad on the internet, and that you just have some key advice at hand to take if something seems a little strange and you can think for yourselves, okay, this doesn't look exactly right, I don't think I will go ahead with this kind of housing ad. So that's our key advice. And before taking a closer look at also some of the questions that we've received, here's also some info on how to stay up to date with upcoming events and activities, or if you just want to know what studying in Gothenburg looks like. You can take a look and follow our international student ambassadors on Instagram at student.gu, as Abby just mentioned. Our students will do takeovers, also they will show you different parts of Gothenburg, and we will send some useful information your way through Instagram as well on how to navigate coming to Gothenburg, moving here, and some tips for everyday student life. And you can also follow us on our Chinese social media on WeChat, Weibo, and RedNote. And another very cool thing, in your first pre-arrival letter, you have also received an invitation to join Goin, which is the university's very own social community. You can download the Goin app and basically find out who else is going to study with you at the University of Gothenburg later this year. And more than 500 students who are going to study at the university this autumn have already joined. And basically on Goin you can meet students with shared interests, hobbies, future classmates from your study program. You can reach out to fellow students from your home country, or join different groups to prepare for your studies. And you can actually also ask questions in our Ask a Student Ambassador channel, and they will do their best to answer them. And this is potentially also a good place to maybe check in with some other students. I believe there are perhaps also some housing related groups where you can maybe share some advice on good, like if you are, for example, looking at different Facebook groups and you're unsure if something is a good place to look for housing or not, you can also perhaps share with other students, and they might share their experiences with you, and you can perhaps help yourself out, and maybe there's other students who have found housing a specific way and they can share their experiences as well. So, and if you have not received any pre-arrival letter, sometimes this can happen, and if you have not received an invitation to join Goin, then we will share with you a link afterwards that you can use to sign up for our pre-arrival letters and to receive your own invitation to join Goin. And we also have planned a couple more events and webinars that you can join during the upcoming weeks, such as next week on 23rd of April. We will have 2 drop-in sessions during which you can join and chat with our international students and our staff regarding any kinds of questions that you have. It could be about student life or more questions about housing. If you want to get some more tips from our ambassadors, or if you have questions that are more of administrative nature, for example, regarding paying your tuition fees, then you can ask our staff. Then on 6th of May, we have another webinar where we will talk about all relevant things that you need to know regarding your move to Sweden and to Gothenburg, and that can be from classroom culture, weather, getting around the city, public transport, student life, as well as our welcome program in August, and much more. And then also on 13th of May, we'll have another drop-in day where you can drop in during 2 sessions to talk with our international students and with staff. And all times here are displayed in Central European summertime. And you will find links to register on our website, on Goin, on social media, as well as in our follow-up email that will follow along with the recording after this webinar, so it will be hard to miss. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you could get a clearer picture of finding housing in Gothenburg, and that we could help you take a first step in your search for accommodation ahead of the beginning of your first semester in Gothenburg. See you soon and take care.